Have you ever stopped and wondered who were the very first people to live on the Indian subcontinent? I mean, what was life actually like for them? Well, get ready, because we're about to travel way, way back in time to find out. Just picture it for a second. No supermarkets, no fridge, no Swiggy or Zomato, nothing. You wake up every single morning, and the biggest question on your mind is, what am I going to eat today, and where in the world am I going to find it? That right there was the everyday reality for the earliest people. And we're about to go on an incredible journey deep into the past to really understand how they not only lived, but how they managed to survive. And when I say way back, I mean it. We're not talking about 100 years ago or even 1,000. We are going back 2 million years. That is such a massive amount of time, it's kind of hard to even wrap your head around it. So who exactly were these ancient people? Well, we call them hunter-gatherers. And that name, it pretty much tells you their entire life story. Let's break down what it means. See, it's right there in the name. They had two jobs, really, hunting animals and gathering plants. This wasn't a hobby, you know? This was how they stayed alive. Their entire life was a constant daily search for food. And check this out. This isn't just some drawing. This is an actual painting from thousands of years ago, made by those early people on the wall of a rock shelter. It's showing a hunt in action. It's like a little window looking directly into their world. Now, looking at that painting might seem pretty exciting, but let's be real, this kind of life was incredibly tough. Every single day was a massive test of their skills, their knowledge, and their strength. It was anything but easy. Yeah, surviving back then wasn't about luck. It was all about skill. To hunt, you had to be super alert, lightning fast, and just smart. And for gathering, oh, you had to be like a walking encyclopedia of plants. You had to know which plants would feed you, which ones were poisonous, and exactly when different fruits would be ready to eat. One mistake could be your last. Which brings us to the big question, right? With all these dangers, wild animals, plants that could kill you, the changing seasons, what was their ultimate strategy? How did they pull it off? Well, the answer is actually pretty simple, but it's also brilliant. They never, ever stayed in one place for too long. Their survival depended on being constantly on the move. Yep, being on the go was their secret weapon. But this wasn't just aimless wandering. Oh no, every single move they made had a purpose. It was all part of a very clever plan to make sure they always had enough food to eat. In fact, historians have figured out 4 main reasons why these hunter-gatherers were always moving. So let's take a look at each one, because they really paint a clear picture of what this life was like. Okay, so why all the traveling? Reason number 1, if they stayed in one place too long, they'd simply eat everything available. They had to move on to let the plants and animals in an area recover. Number 2, their food was on the move. Animals like deer and wild cattle migrate, so if you want to hunt them, you have to follow them. Makes sense, right? Reason 3, seasons. Just like we have a mango season, they knew that different fruits and plants would be ready at different times in different places, so they follow the seasons. And finally, reason number 4, and this is a big one, water. When a river or lake dried up, they had no choice. They had to pack up and find a new source of water to survive. And that's really the main thing to remember here. Their constant journey wasn't just random wandering. It was a smart, skillful strategy. It was a masterclass in living with nature that allowed them to survive and thrive for thousands upon thousands of years. So I'll leave you with this question to think about. We've talked about hunting, gathering, and always being on the move. Out of all of that, what do you think was the single biggest, toughest challenge they had to face every single day? Give it some thought. All right, let's take a trip way, way back in time. Today, we're going on an adventure to meet our earliest ancestors and see how their amazing minds sparked the very first technological revolution, one that helped them not just survive, but totally change the world. So let's start with a question. Just for a second, try to imagine your day with absolutely no sharp tools. No knives to cut your food, no scissors, not even a nail clipper. It's kind of hard to imagine, right? Well, for the very first humans, that was just normal life. To really get why their inventions were so incredible, we have to understand the huge challenges they were up against every single day. I mean, for them, survival was a full-time job. And their world was full of dangers. You know, a lot of the animals around them were much, much faster and stronger. People had to figure out which plants were okay to eat and which ones were poisonous. They had to know exactly when fruits would be ripe. And hunting, that took some serious skill, speed, and working together as a team. So, to stay safe, early people would find shelter in places like caves and under rock overhangs. And here's the really cool part. They left clues behind for us. Things like these incredible paintings, which give us a real window into their world and the animals they lived with.
So with all these challenges, how on earth did they do it? How did they manage to survive and even thrive? What was their secret weapon that changed the whole game?
The answer, believe it or not, was stone tools. By figuring out how to shape stone, these early people basically became the world's very first engineers. Just think about that for a second. They could look at a plain old rock and see the potential for a tool inside. That was a massive leap forward. They created technology that would totally change their lives and really set the stage for all of human history. And don't think of these as just simple, sharp rocks. No way. They were like the original multi-tool. They used them for everything: cutting meat, scraping bark off trees, preparing animal hides for clothes, chopping up fruits and roots. They even figured out how to attach some to handles to make powerful spears and arrows for hunting. So, how do they actually make them? This part is just fascinating. How do you turn a regular stone into a sharp, essential tool for survival? Well, thanks to archaeologists, who are kind of like detectives for the past, we've actually figured out the two main techniques these ancient engineers used to craft their tools. The first method is called stone on stone, and it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. You'd hold the main stone, that's called the core, in one hand. Then you use another stone as a kind of hammer to carefully chip off pieces, or flakes, until you've got a sharp cutting edge. The second technique, pressure flaking, was a little more advanced. It allowed for a lot more control. For this, the core stone was placed on something firm, like a big rock. Then they'd use a piece of bone or another stone as a sort of punch, tapping it with a hammer stone to pop off tiny, precise flakes. This let them get a much finer, sharper shape on their tools. Okay, so now we know how they made the tools, but let's talk about where all of this happened. Where were these ancient homes and workshops? Archaeologists have found these really interesting places they call factory sites. These were spots, usually near a river or something, where you could find lots of good quality stone. People would travel to these places specifically to make their tools, and they'd leave behind all the little stone chips and broken pieces, all the evidence of their hard work. But they also found places that were both a home and a workshop. At these habitation-cum-factory sites, people weren't just visiting, they were living there for longer stretches of time. This is where daily life, eating and sleeping, happened right alongside the super important job of making tools. So, what's the big takeaway here? Why was this one invention, the stone tool, so unbelievably important? It all comes down to this. These tools were so much more than just shaped rocks. They were the very first step on the long ladder of human technology. This single idea gave our ancestors the power to control their world, get more food, and protect themselves. It literally changed the future of humanity forever. And what's so amazing is that this incredible journey of invention was really just getting started. Once they mastered stone, a whole new universe of possibilities opened up. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What do you think they invented next? Ever wondered how the very first people on the subcontinent actually lived? I mean, they didn't have houses or grocery stores or, well, anything like what we have. So how on earth did they survive? And how did they find a place to call home? Come on, let's dive into this incredible story of survival and discovery. It's going to be amazing. Okay, just picture this for a second. A world with absolutely no houses. When it starts to pour rain, where do you go? When the sun is just blazing hot, how do you cool down? What do you do when a strong, chilly wind picks up? Seriously, where would you go? This was the #1 challenge our ancestors had to figure out. All right, to find the answers, we need to put on our detective hats. The best detectives for the ancient past are called archaeologists. And they're experts at following tiny clues left behind thousands of years ago to piece together the whole story. So, you ready? Let's follow the trail. Now, these archaeologists find their clues in special places they call sites. A site is basically the exact spot where early humans lived or worked or maybe made their tools. And you know what they noticed? Something super important. A lot of these sites were right near water, like rivers and lakes, which, when you think about it, makes total sense, right? Everyone needs water. Now, this is a really key idea. The earliest people didn't have blueprints or construction crews. They had to be smart and use what nature gave them.
So they became experts at finding a home, not building one. The perfect shelters were already out there, just waiting.
And what did they find? Natural caves and rock shelters. These were basically the perfect ready-made apartments. Can you imagine the relief? These places gave them amazing protection. Whether it was a heavy downpour, that scorching sun, or those powerful winds, a cave was a safe, comfortable place to hang out.
And get this, we actually know where some of these ancient homes are today. A really famous one in India is called Bhimbetka. It's in the hills of what we now call Madhya Pradesh. And the evidence archaeologists found there is just incredible. It shows that people lived in these exact rock shelters for a very, very long time.
But you know what's even cooler? These caves weren't just a roof over their heads. They were also the world's very first art galleries. People painted amazing scenes from their lives right on the walls. Things like hunting trips. It just goes to show you, these were real homes, places full of culture and community.
Okay, so they figured out shelter. That's huge. They were safe from the weather. But they still faced other big dangers. And this brings us to one of the most important discoveries in all of human history, a real game changer. Think about it. A cave is great, but at night, it's pitch black, and it can get really, really cold. Plus, what about all the dangerous animals out there that might also be looking for a cozy spot? A cave could still be a pretty scary place. They needed something else to be truly safe. And guess what? Our history detectives found another giant clue. This time, the evidence turned up way down in the Kurnool Caves in what is now Andhra Pradesh. And what they found there, well, it changed absolutely everything.
The big clue was traces of ash. Yeah, just ash. But that was the smoking gun. Finding old ash deep inside a cave could only mean one thing. The people living there knew how to use fire. They had managed to control one of the most powerful forces in nature. Wow! And fire literally changed the world for them. All of a sudden, they had light to push back the total darkness. They could cook their food, like roasting meat, which made it way tastier and healthier. And, maybe most importantly, fire was a weapon. A flickering torch was all it took to scare away even the biggest and scariest predators.
You know, learning about all this really is like going on an adventure, isn't it? It's like we're traveling through time, seeing how people use their brains and their curiosity to solve these huge problems and completely change their lives.
So, with a safe place to live and the incredible power of fire, the earliest people were now so much safer, so much stronger. They had tackled some massive challenges, but their journey was far from over. So here's a question for you. What do you think was the next big problem they had to solve to keep going? We'll find out next time.
Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're going to jump in a time machine and travel way, way back to see one of the biggest changes in all of human history. It's an amazing story about how the weather getting a little bit warmer actually created the world of farming and basically set the stage for everything we know today. Let's get right into it.
So let me start with a huge question for you. How on earth could a little change in the weather, thousands and thousands of years ago, create the very world you and I live in right now? It sounds kind of crazy, right? But believe me, it's the key to this whole story. Let's figure it out.
All right, part one. Our story begins with the entire planet going through a massive transformation. And I'm not talking about a small change. This was a complete makeover for the whole world. And it all started with just one thing.
Okay, let's set the dial on our time machine to about 12,000 years ago. That's when this incredible story really kicks off. And yeah, it's ancient history, but you'll see how the things that happened back then are still a huge part of our lives today.
So here's the big secret. The world started to warm up. That's it. After being super cold for a very long time, the Earth's thermostat basically just went up a few notches. And that one little change, well, it was the spark that lit the fuse for everything else.
So the planet is getting toastier. What happens next? Well, the first big effect was on the land itself. As the temperatures started climbing, a whole new kind of environment began to spread all across the globe. And that new environment was grasslands. Yep, just fields of grass. As all the ice started to melt and things got warmer, these huge, sweeping plains of grass started to grow everywhere, covering massive parts of the world that used to be way too cold. This was a brand new ecosystem. And check this out. This is so cool. These are actual paintings from early humans on cave walls. It shows us exactly what they were seeing. They were painting the animals that absolutely love these new grassy fields. It just goes to show, where you get a lot of grass, you're going to get a lot of grass eaters.
Those cave paintings lead us right to the next piece of the puzzle. See, the rise of all these grasslands led directly to a food revolution. With all this new green stuff to eat, certain animal populations just exploded, creating a whole new menu for early humans.
I mean, the number of animals that lived on grass just went through the roof. All of a sudden, the world was filled with these enormous herds of deer, antelope, goats, sheep, and cattle. For the people who hunted back then, this wasn't just a small change, it was a game changer.
So, with a changing world and tons of food walking around, people had to adapt. They had to change how they did things. And this wasn't just a tiny adjustment. This was the very beginning of a completely new way for humans to live on planet Earth.
So just imagine for a second, you're an early human, a hunter, and suddenly everywhere you look, there are huge herds of animals. What do? How does that change your whole plan for finding dinner?
You got it. The first thing they did was they stopped just wandering all over the place and started following the herds. As they tracked them, they became total experts on these animals. They learned what they ate, where they went, when they had babies. And all this knowledge sparked a revolutionary idea. Hey, what if we stop just chasing our food and start, managing it? And that, right there, was the birth of herding.
But wait, the story doesn't stop with the animals. Remember that big climate change? Well, it wasn't just good for grass. It was amazing for other kinds of plants, too. Plants that people could actually eat. For the first time, things like wheat and barley started growing wild, everywhere. So people, men, women, and even children, started gathering up all these grains for food. And just like with the animals, they watched and they learned. They figured out where the best plants grew and when they were ready to be picked. And that led to the second world-changing idea. Instead of just finding food, what if we could make it? By taking the seeds and planting them themselves, these people became the world's very first farmers.
And just like that, from a single shift in the climate, humans got two new superpowers: raising animals and growing plants. Herding and farming. Together, those two skills built everything: villages, cities, the whole modern world. Which really leaves us with one last question to chew on. Which one do you think was the bigger deal? Learning to raise animals or learning to grow plants? Something to think about. Thanks so much for joining.
Okay, I want you to imagine traveling way, way back in time. A time before cities, before farms, even before writing. Today, we're becoming historical detectives, and we're going to follow a trail of ancient clues left behind by the very first people. Let's start our investigation.
So that leads to a pretty big question, right? How in the world do we know what happened millions of years ago? I mean, without any books or internet, how can we possibly piece together the story of our most ancient ancestors? It seems impossible.
Well, the answer is, we've got to think like detectives. Archaeologists are basically history's detectives. They search for clues, things like footprints, old tools, even ancient paintings that were left behind in the distant past. So, put on your detective hats. Let's go find some clues.
All right, every good detective needs to understand the timeline of the case, right? So our very first clue is all about cracking the code of time. To really get what happened in the past, we first need to put it all in order. And archaeologists do this by giving names to these huge chunks of history.
So the first, and I mean the longest chapter in human history, is called the Palaeolithic period. Now, the name itself is a clue. As you can see, it comes from two Greek words: paleo, which means old, and lithos, which means stone. So, Old Stone Age. And why? Because stone was the most important material people used to make their tools for survival.
Okay, get ready for this, because this fact is pretty wild. The Paleolithic era wasn't just a long period of time. It was practically the entire story. It covers a whopping 99% of all human history. Just think about that. Almost everything that makes us human happened in this one vast era.
So what comes after the Old Stone Age? Well, that's the Mesolithic, or the Middle Stone Age. This was a time of huge environmental changes around the world. As things warmed up, people had to adapt. And they did it with some amazing new tech. They created these new, tiny, super precise stone tools called microliths.
And finally, that brings us to the Neolithic, or the New Stone Age. This is where things really start to change again, especially with big new ideas like farming.
So there you have it, old, middle, and new. That's our timeline, our code at a time. I'd say clue number 1 is officially cracked. Okay, so we've got our timeline sorted. Now it's time to dig into clue number 2. And this one? Wow. It's like a message sent directly to us from the past, painted right there on the stone walls of ancient caves.
Just look at this. Isn't that incredible? This is a real rock painting from a cave right here in India. Archaeologists have found tons of paintings just like it, especially in places like Madhya Pradesh and southern Uttar Pradesh. These aren't just doodles. They are like windows looking straight into the daily lives of our ancestors.
So what do these paintings tell us, detectives? Well, for one, they show us the kinds of wild animals that were around back then. But look closer. It's the way they're drawn, the detail, the accuracy, the incredible skill. This tells us something really important. The people who made these paintings knew the natural world so well. This wasn't just art, it was knowledge created by intelligent and observant people.
All right, our investigation is taking us to our third and final clue. We're heading to a very specific spot on the map. Not just a place where people lived, but a place where they worked. We're visiting an ancient tool factory.
This place is called Hunsgi. And let me tell you, for archaeologists, this was like hitting the jackpot. They dug up a massive number of stone tools, all from way back in the Paleolithic period. This site is a really crucial piece of our puzzle.
So the clues they found at Hunsgi tell a really interesting story. This wasn't just some place people stopped for a bit. Archaeologists call it a habitation-cum-factory site, which is just a fancy way of saying it was both a home and a workshop. And it makes total sense. People lived here because the stuff they needed to make their tools, like local limestone, was right there. It was the perfect spot to live and work.
Okay, detectives, we've followed the trail, we've gathered our clues, we cracked the code of time, we saw their amazing stories on stone walls, and we've even visited their workshop. Now it's time to put all the pieces together and solve the case of the earliest people.
So just to recap our investigation, clue number 1, we figured out the timeline, the old, middle, and new Stone Ages. Clue number 2, their incredible art, those rock paintings that told us so much. And clue number 3, their tools, which led us straight to that awesome home and factory spot in Hunsgi.
So, after looking at all the evidence, what's our final conclusion? What does it all mean? It's pretty clear, isn't it? Our earliest ancestors, they weren't simple or primitive at all. They were smart problem solvers, they were creative artists, and they were highly skilled survivors who knew their world inside and out.
And you know, that leaves us with one last really exciting thought. The story of our past, it's not over. The ground we walk on is like a giant history book with pages we haven't even turned yet. So I'll leave you with this question. What other amazing clues from our ancient past are still out there, just waiting to be found?